Let me ask you something. You know Dracula. You know the Grim Reaper. You know Death himself, the skeleton in the black robe with the scythe. Western culture has spent centuries building up a mythology around the concept of death as a character, a being, something you could look at and understand. But what if I told you that somewhere in the forests of Eastern Europe, thousands of years before Bram Stoker ever picked up a pen, people were telling stories about something far more disturbing than any vampire? Something that didn't just bring death, something that had conquered it, something that looked at death, understood exactly how it worked, and simply decided it didn't apply to him. His name is Koschei, and if you've never heard of him, that's exactly the problem I'm here to fix tonight. Koschei the Deathless. That's his title, not his description. In Russian folklore, this isn't a boast or a legend or something people said about him behind his back. It's simply a fact about reality. The man cannot die. Not won't. Not refuses to. Cannot. And the reason why, the actual mechanism of how he achieved this, is one of the most brilliant and terrifying ideas in the entire history of human mythology. But before we get to that, I need you to understand something about where Koschei comes from. Because he's not just a fairy tale villain. He's not the Eastern European equivalent of a Disney antagonist. He is the distillation of thousands of years of Slavic understanding about death, about power, about the relationship between the soul and the body, about what it means to want something so desperately that you're willing to pay any price to get it. To understand Koschei, you first need to understand the world he inhabits. The Slavic mythological universe is built on a structure that is both simple and profound. There are 3 worlds, not 2. Most cultures divide existence into the world of the living and the world of the dead. The Slavs had 3. Yav, the world of the living, our world, the world of sunlight and breath and the turning of seasons. Nav, the world of the dead, the world beneath the roots of the great world tree, cold and dark but not evil, simply other. And Prav, the world of the gods, the world of perfect order and divine law, high in the branches of the same tree. Everything exists on this tree. Everything has its place. The dead go to Nav. The living exist in Yav. The gods dwell in Prav. This is the natural order. This is how it's supposed to work. Koschei broke it, not by accident, not through some cosmic tragedy or divine punishment. He broke it deliberately, strategically, with what can only be described as terrifying intelligence. He looked at the system, understood it better than anyone else, found the single point of failure, and exploited it completely. And what he did to achieve this is why I said he's one of the most disturbing figures in all of world mythology. He took his soul out of his body and hid it. I need you to sit with that for a moment because it sounds simple, but it isn't. In Slavic cosmology, the soul and the body are bound together. That's what life is, that binding. The soul inhabits the body houses the soul. And when death comes, that binding is severed. The body returns to the earth. The soul travels to Nav. Koschei understood that death, the actual act of dying, requires the soul to be present. It requires the soul to be in the body so it can be separated from it. If there is no soul in the body, there is nothing to separate. The body cannot die, it simply continues, forever. So he removed his soul. He reached inside himself and pulled out the very thing that made him mortal, the very thing that connected him to the natural order, the very thing that made him human, and he hid it. Somewhere outside himself, somewhere unreachable. And then he became something that doesn't have a name in most languages. He's not undead. Undead implies something that was dead and came back. Koschei never died. He's not a ghost or a spirit. He still has a physical body, a very real, very present physical body that can pick you up with one hand and throw you through a castle wall. He's not possessed or cursed in the traditional sense. He chose this. He did this to himself deliberately. He is something entirely new, a human being who simply decided mortality wasn't for him and found the loophole in the universe to avoid it. And he's been around for a very long time. Here's where it gets interesting from a historical standpoint. Scholars who study Slavic mythology argue endlessly about exactly how old the Koschei archetype is. Some trace him back to the Proto-Slavic period, which means we're talking about the centuries before the great Slavic migrations, before the separate Slavic cultures as we know them today even existed. That potentially puts Koschei at 2,000 years old or more as a concept, a story, a fear. But here's what's even more interesting. Koschei almost certainly predates the specific form he takes in the fairy tales most people know. The Koschei of the folk tales, the one we'll be exploring tonight, is already a literary refinement of something much older, something more primal. Before he was the sorcerer king who kidnaps beautiful women and has his death hidden in an egg, he was something else. Something connected to Nav in a much more fundamental way. Something that wasn't just a powerful villain, but was, in a very real sense, a force of nature. Some scholars believe the earliest version of Koschei was actually a deity or something very close to it. A chthonic figure, meaning a figure connected to the underworld, to the earth, to the realm of the dead. A counterpart or an aspect of Veles, the great Slavic god of Nav, of death, of wisdom earned through darkness. In this reading, Koschei isn't just a villain who lives a long time. He's the embodiment of what happens when the boundary between life and death is violated. He's what the universe looks like when the natural order breaks down. And then, over hundreds of years, as Christianity slowly transformed Slavic culture and the old gods were pushed underground, Koschei the deity became Koschei the folk-tale villain. The divine became the diabolical. The cosmic became the personal. And somehow, in that transition, he became more frightening, not less. Because now he wasn't just a distant cosmic principle, he was a specific individual creature. He had a face. He had desires. He had a castle in a dark land. He could look at you. Let's talk about what Koschei actually looks like. Because this is one of the things that Western audiences find most surprising about him. He's not impressive. Not physically. Not in the way that Dracula is impressive, that aura of aristocratic darkness and sensuality. Not in the way that the Grim Reaper is impressive, that silent cosmic inevitability. Koschei is described in the tales as gaunt, thin beyond thinness, thin in a way that suggests something is fundamentally wrong with the body, that something essential is absent from it. His skin is often described as stretched over his bones like paper. His eyes are sunken deep. He is old, ancient even, despite his immortality, or perhaps because of it. Centuries of living without a soul will do something to a face. And his name, Koschei. The word itself comes from the old Slavic kost, which means bone. He is the bony one, the skeletal one. He doesn't just look like death, he looks like what comes after death. The part that remains, the structure underneath, the thing that doesn't rot away. He's the skeleton that kept walking. There's something deeply psychologically significant about this. In Western mythology, when we want to represent power, we tend to make our villains beautiful. Dracula is handsome and compelling. Satan in Paradise Lost is magnificent. Even the most powerful villains in contemporary fantasy tend to have a kind of dark grandeur. The fear they inspire is mixed with a kind of terrible awe at their magnificence. Koschei inspires no awe. He inspires revulsion. And that's intentional. That's the point. The people who created and refined these stories over generations were saying something very specific with his appearance. They were saying, look at what immortality actually looks like. Not the fantasy of eternal youth, the reality of a body that has been alive for centuries, but hasn't truly lived. A body without a soul inside it. A body that is essentially a very sophisticated corpse that hasn't gotten the message yet. It's not magnificent. It's wrong. But he is terrifying. And his terror doesn't come from his appearance. It comes from two things, his intelligence and his completeness. Koschei is brilliant. In the stories, he consistently outmaneuvers everyone around him. He doesn't just have magical power, though he has that too. He thinks, he plans, he anticipates. When heroes come to challenge him, he usually knows they're coming. When people try to learn his secrets, he has layers of deception prepared. He has survived not just through his immortality, but through constant active intelligence. He is the most dangerous kind of antagonist, not a brute force, a mind. And he is complete. This is harder to explain but important. Most villains in mythology and folklore have something missing, a fatal flaw, a vulnerability, an Achilles heel. Villains want something they don't have. They're driven by lack. Koschei seems to lack nothing. He has his castle, he has his power, he has his servants, he has his absolute safety. He is, in a horrible way, fulfilled. He doesn't need anything from anyone. He takes what he wants, not because he needs it, but because he can. Because there is no one who can stop him. Because stopping him requires knowing something that, for most of the tales, seems impossible to know. Now let's talk about what he actually does. Because so far I've been speaking about him as a cosmic figure, a philosophical concept made flesh. But in the actual folktales, in the stories that have been told to children in Russia and Ukraine and Belarus and Poland for centuries, Koschei does something very specific, and very specific things happen to him. He kidnaps women. Specifically, he kidnaps the women that heroes love. The beloved, the princess, the bride. He rides out on his extraordinary horse, a supernatural beast that moves so fast it seems to flow across the landscape, and he takes her. He puts her in his castle somewhere at the edge of the world, beyond the thrice 9 kingdoms and the thrice 10 lands, in a place that requires extraordinary effort and supernatural assistance to even reach. And then he waits. And here's the thing that makes this particular dynamic so psychologically interesting and so culturally significant. He doesn't really want the woman for herself, not usually. Or rather, that's not the primary motivation. He wants her because she represents the connection between life and Nav, between the world of the living and the world of the dead. In the oldest readings of the myth, Koschei taking the hero's beloved represents death itself, reaching up from Nav and taking something that belongs in the world of the living. The entire story of a hero going to rescue his beloved from Koschei is the story of the living fighting back against death, trying to reclaim what death has claimed, trying to bring the dead back, which, if you think about it, is what every human being who has ever grieved has wanted to do. But in many of the tales, there's a different and more disturbing dynamic at play. Koschei doesn't just kidnap the woman, he holds her. He keeps her, not through physical imprisonment alone, but through a strange kind of enthrallment. Some versions of the tale suggest he wants her to love him voluntarily. Some suggest he is trying to feed something through her presence, some vitality, some warmth that his soulless existence denies him. He has everything, except the one thing his own nature makes impossible, a genuine, living connection to the world of the living. Think about that for a moment. The most powerful, most indestructible being in the folklore of an entire civilization is fundamentally, hopelessly lonely. He cannot die. He cannot feel the way living things feel. He can take and he can hold and he can control, but he cannot connect. And some deep, ancient part of him still wants to. That's what he's reaching for when he takes the hero's beloved. Not just domination, something he lost, or gave up, or never had. Something he can approach but never truly touch, because it requires the very thing he removed from himself to achieve his immortality: a soul. The Slavic storytellers who built these tales over generations were not sentimentalists. They were not making an argument that love is stronger than power in some abstract romantic sense. They were making a much more specific and much darker point. When Koschei removes his soul to achieve immortality, he doesn't just escape death, he escapes life. All of it. The pain of it, and the joy of it, and the connection of it, and the meaning of it. He gains infinite time. He loses everything worth spending time on. Now, I want to talk about the most famous element of the Koschei legend, the thing that makes him, by the standards of story structure alone, one of the most brilliantly constructed villains in folklore history: his death, or rather, his death's location. Because his death exists, it can be found, it can be used to kill him. It's just hidden in the most ingenious nested puzzle box that the human storytelling imagination ever produced. This is how it works. Somewhere in the world there is an island. On that island, there is an oak tree. Buried under the roots of that oak tree, there is a chest. Inside the chest, there is a hare. Inside the hare, there is a duck. Inside the duck, there is an egg. And inside the egg, there is a needle. And on the point of that needle, there is Koschei's death. Break the needle, and Koschei dies. That's it. That's the mechanism. That's the loophole. But let's actually think about what this construction means, because it's not just clever plot structure. It's a profound piece of mythological architecture that encodes an entire worldview. The first thing to notice is that Koschei's death is hidden inside living things, inside a hare, inside a duck. Living things that can run, that can fly, that can escape. If you find the chest and open it, the hare will try to flee. If you catch the hare and open it, the duck will fly away. You need to be fast enough, capable enough, determined enough to catch something that is actively fighting for its own survival. Because in some deep symbolic sense, these living things are Koschei's death, fighting to preserve itself, the same way anything alive fights to continue living. The second thing to notice is the nesting. Death inside life inside death inside life. The egg is death, a symbol of birth and beginning. The duck is life. The hare is life. The chest is a box, a container, something like a coffin. The oak tree is life, sacred life. The tree that in Slavic tradition connects the worlds. The island is isolation, separation, the unreachable place. Each layer is a different kind of defense, a different kind of barrier between the hero and the thing he needs. You have to penetrate all of them. The third and most important thing to notice is that the death is a needle. Not a sword, not a great weapon, not something powerful. The smallest, sharpest, most precise thing imaginable. To kill Koschei, you don't need overwhelming force. You need precision. You need to find the exact right tiny point and break it. This is the story saying, even the most powerful, most indestructible thing in existence has a single point of vulnerability. The challenge isn't power, it's knowledge. It's finding the needle. Scholars of mythology have pointed out the remarkable structural parallels between this construction and the concept of the external soul found in folklore traditions across vastly different cultures. From West African mythology to Norse legend to Scottish fairy tales, there are stories of beings who have hidden their soul, their life force, their death outside their body, and thereby made themselves invulnerable. This is one of the oldest and most widespread narrative ideas in human storytelling, which tells us something significant. The fear that drives it is universal. Every human being exists with a profound vulnerability. We know we can be killed. We know the mechanism of our own destruction is always present, always available, always just a heartbeat away. The fantasy of externalizing that vulnerability, of taking the part of you that can be destroyed and hiding it so far away that no one could ever reach it, is not a Slavic fantasy or a Russian fantasy. It is a human fantasy. Koschei is what that fantasy looks like when it's fully realized. He is the human desire for invulnerability taken to its absolute logical conclusion. And the story consistently tells us, even that doesn't work the way you hope. Now let's talk about Koschei in actual stories, because I've been speaking largely in abstractions, and the power of this figure really comes through in specific narratives. The most famous Koschei story, the one that appears in countless variants across Slavic folklore, usually goes something like this. A hero, often named Ivan, sometimes a prince and sometimes just a peasant's son, discovers that his beloved has been taken by Koschei. The taking is sudden, violent, impossible to prevent. One moment she is there, the next, Koschei's extraordinary horse has appeared, and she is gone. Ivan sets out to rescue her. Immediately, he hits the first problem. He doesn't know where to go. The land where Koschei keeps his captive is beyond the known world, past the places that have names on any map, out where the world ends. So he has to seek guidance. And this is where one of the most extraordinary figures in Slavic folklore enters the picture. Baba Yaga. If you know anything about Slavic mythology, you know Baba Yaga. If you don't, the brief version is this. She is an ancient, terrifying, morally ambiguous witch who lives in a house on chicken legs in the deep forest. She sits in her house with her nose touching the ceiling. She flies through the air in a mortar, grinding her pestle on the ground to erase her tracks. She is older than history. She exists in the space between the world of the living and the world of the dead, between Yav and Nav. She is the guardian of the threshold. And she is, in the deepest reading of the mythology, the only being who knows the way to Koschei's domain. This is not coincidental. Koschei and Baba Yaga are, in the mythological architecture of Slavic folklore, counterparts, two aspects of the same deep concept. She is the threshold between life and death. He is what happens when someone refuses to cross that threshold. She knows the way to Nav, to the realm of the dead. He lives at the very edge of it, in a castle between worlds, neither fully alive nor fully dead. They are linked. Some scholars argue they were once part of the same mythological complex, two faces of the chthonic world, the world beneath and beyond. When Ivan reaches Baba Yaga's hut, she initially behaves the way she always does. She threatens, she insults, she makes the situation seem impossible. But if Ivan behaves correctly, if he is brave and clever, and treats her with the right mixture of respect and boldness, she eventually helps him. She gives him the information he needs. She may give him a magical horse, because Koschei's horse is supernatural, and to reach Koschei, Ivan needs a horse that can match it. And she tells him the secret, that Koschei's death is hidden on a distant island, in an oak, in a chest, in a hare, in a duck, in an egg, in a needle. Then Ivan goes, and the journey itself is a kind of death and rebirth. He passes through the edge of the known world. He travels through forests where the trees are so thick no light reaches the ground. He crosses rivers that separate the living from the dead. He meets supernatural beings, sometimes enemies, sometimes helpers, sometimes both. By the time he reaches Koschei's land, he has already died a little. He has already become something different from what he was when he started. He finds Koschei's castle. He gets in, usually by finding the captive woman and working with her. And here's where it gets interesting, because the woman, Koschei's captive, is often the key to learning the secret of his death. Not through her own magical power, but through something much more human. She talks to Koschei. She asks him questions. She uses his strange loneliness, his deep desire for connection, against him. She asks him, "Where is your death?" And here's one of the most revealing moments in all of Slavic folklore. Koschei lies. He tells her his death is in the broom by the door. She believes him, or pretends to, and he sees her reaction, and it pleases him somehow. This ability to deceive, this power over what she believes is true. She worships the broom. She treats it as sacred. He tells her later, "No, my death is in the fence around the castle." She worships the fence. He watches, pleased again. Finally, tested or charmed or simply unable to entirely resist the desire to be truly known by someone, he tells her the truth. The island, the oak, the chest, the hare, the duck, the egg, the needle. She tells Ivan. Ivan goes to the island. The hare runs. He catches it. The duck flies. He catches it over water, and the egg falls and sinks, but he finds it anyway. He brings it back to the castle. And here's the final confrontation, the last meeting between the hero and the immortal. Ivan stands before Koschei with the egg in his hand, and Koschei, for the first time in centuries or millennia, is afraid. Because for the first time, his death is not hidden. Someone holds it. Ivan squeezes the egg. Koschei writhes. Ivan squeezes harder. Koschei falls to his knees. This being who has never been hurt, who has never been vulnerable, who has never had to confront the possibility of his own end, is suddenly experiencing something entirely new. His own mortality arriving all at once. Every death he cheated coming back at the same moment. Ivan breaks the needle. Koschei dies. Not grandly, not magnificently, not like a hero dying, he just dies. The life goes out of him like a flame going out when the candle is done. Because that's what happens when you've been running on borrowed time for centuries, and the account finally comes due all at once. There's nothing left to burn. Now, I want to spend some time talking about what Koschei means, not just as a story, but as a cultural artifact, as a piece of human thinking about very deep questions that every civilization has had to confront. Because Koschei is not primarily about immortality as a power fantasy. He's a warning. And understanding what the warning is requires understanding the cultural context in which these stories were told. Slavic folk culture, in its pre-Christian and early Christian forms, had a very particular relationship with death. Death was not something to be feared or avoided above all else. It was a transition. It was, in its proper form, a natural part of the cycle. The soul moved from Yav to Nav. The body returned to the earth. Life went on, in a different form, at a different level of the great world tree. What was considered genuinely terrible, genuinely unnatural, was not death but the failure to die properly. The soul that couldn't pass to Nav because it had unfinished business in Yav. The body that wouldn't stay in the earth. The living who tried to hold on to the dead, and the dead who tried to hold on to the living. Koschei is the ultimate expression of this fear. He is someone who took that wrong turn, that terrible wrong turn, and went so far down it that there's no coming back. He tried to avoid death, and in doing so, he destroyed his own life. He has power. He has time. He has everything except the things that make power and time meaningful. And there's something almost tragic in the most thoughtful retellings of his story. He is not happy. He is not fulfilled. He is a creature of profound absence, missing the one thing he cast aside to gain everything else. The warmth of the world of the living is accessible to him, but he can't truly feel it. He can take Ivan's beloved and put her in his castle, but he can't make her love him, and he can't truly love her. He can look at the world and understand it, but he can't be part of it. He is the person who chose to live forever and discovered that what he'd actually chosen was to be alone forever, watching through glass as the world went on without him. I think about this in the context of contemporary culture, and I find it surprisingly relevant. We live in an era of genuine technological aspiration towards something very much like what Koschei achieved. Transhumanism, life extension, the preservation of consciousness beyond biological death. These are real research programs with real money and real scientists working on them. Smart, serious people genuinely trying to find the egg in the duck and the hair in the chest under the oak on the island. Trying to find the external location where they can deposit their death and take it out of the equation. And I'm not here to argue whether any of that is possible or desirable, but I do think Koschei asks us a question worth sitting with. If you removed your soul to become immortal, would the thing that remained be you? And if it wasn't you, if the you that remembered laughing with friends and loving people and feeling sunlight on your face was gone, replaced by something that had your memories and your intelligence, but not your connection to the living world, would you call that winning? The Slavic storytellers of the pre-modern era were not scientists, but they were asking a question that cuts right to the heart of what we are and what we value. And their answer, expressed through thousands of retellings of a story about a gaunt immortal in a castle at the edge of the world, is pretty clear. The thing that makes life valuable is the same thing that makes you mortal. Remove one and you remove the other. The needle and the soul are the same thing. Koschei hid them in the same place. Now let's talk about some of the fascinating variations and interpretations of Koschei, because the folk tradition is not a monolith. Over centuries and across hundreds of miles of Slavic territory, the stories evolved, branched, contradicted each other, layered new meanings on old ones. In some variants, Koschei is explicitly a sorcerer, a human being who achieved his immortality through magical practice, through years of dark study and ritual. In these versions, he is more like Faust than like a deity, someone who made a choice and paid a price, and continues paying it. He is the ultimate product of a tradition of power through transgression, through stepping beyond the boundaries of what is permitted. This version is darker in a particular way because it makes the choice more visible, more human. He wasn't born this way. He did this to himself. Every day he looks like a skeleton is a day he could have chosen differently. In other variants, Koschei is much more explicitly a king of the dead, a ruler of Nav rather than a refugee from it. He has a court, subjects, a whole civilization in his dark kingdom. And in this reading, his kidnapping of the hero's beloved is not the act of a lonely monster, but a political act, a territorial act. He is asserting dominion over someone who belongs in his realm, death claiming what it's owed. And the hero's quest is not just a rescue mission, but a negotiation, or more precisely, a refusal to negotiate. The living saying to death, "Not yet, not this one, not today." There's a version of the story where Koschei is not the primary villain, but almost a tragic figure, where we see moments of his interior life, where we understand something of what he sacrificed. These versions tend to be later, more literary, influenced by the romantic tradition that swept through Russian culture in the 19th century. But they're not entirely at odds with the older folk tradition. The oldest layers of the myth already contain that strange loneliness, that reaching toward the warmth of the living. It just didn't used to be sympathetic. Now, in some tellings, it is. And there is a particularly fascinating class of stories where the hero's journey to rescue his beloved from Koschei is not straightforwardly triumphant, where Ivan is killed, sometimes multiple times, and has to be resurrected by his brothers or by magical means, where the quest requires literal death and rebirth, where to reach the place where Koschei keeps his captive, you have to have already died. These stories are explicitly saying, To take something back from death, you have to be willing to go there. You have to pay with yourself. This is not a comfortable idea. It doesn't fit neatly into the category of adventure stories with brave heroes and guaranteed happy endings. It's something more complicated and more honest. It's saying that the boundary between life and death is not something that can be crossed lightly, that recovering what death has taken is not free, that the path to where Koschei lives runs through Nav, through the world of the dead, and some of what goes in doesn't come back out unchanged. Let me tell you about the horse. Because Koschei's horse is one of the most interesting elements of the legend and one of the least discussed. In the folktales, Koschei rides a supernatural horse of extraordinary speed and power. This horse is often described as being able to run across the sky, to travel between worlds, to move faster than thought. It's the tool Koschei uses for his kidnappings, the vehicle of his predations. And significantly, when a hero eventually acquires a horse of comparable or superior power, that horse is often described as Koschei's own, taken or inherited from him somehow, a gift from Baba Yaga, or one from some ordeal. The horse in Slavic mythology is deeply associated with the boundary between worlds. Horses carry the dead to Nav. Horses carry the sun across the sky. Horses are the animals of transition, of crossing, of movement between states. Koschei's horse is the horse of death incarnate, a creature that exists to carry things from the world of the living to the world not. And the fact that a hero can acquire an equal or greater horse is deeply symbolic. It means the hero has access to the same passage. He can travel to where the dead are kept. He can return with what was taken. He has earned, through his ordeal, the right to stand in both worlds simultaneously. There's something here that connects to very ancient practices. Across the pre-Christian Slavic world, horses were sacrificed at funerals. A man's horse was killed to go with him to Nav, to carry him there, to serve him in the world of the dead. The horse was the literal vehicle of the soul's journey. Koschei having a supernatural horse isn't just a detail about his power or his speed. It's a marker of his nature. He is a creature of that passage, of that crossing. His horse is death's own horse. And when Ivan rides a horse to match it, he is claiming, at least temporarily, death's own vehicle for the purposes of the living. Now, I want to talk about Koschei's influence, because this is a figure who has been remarkably durable, not just in the original folk tradition, but in Russian and Slavic literature and art, and now in global popular culture. In 19th century Russia, as nationalism drove a massive interest in folk culture and mythology, Koschei became a literary figure. He appeared in poems, in operas, in visual art. The painter Viktor Vasnetsov created the definitive visual image of Koschei that most Russians still picture when they hear the name. An ancient, skeletal figure, impossibly thin, draped in dark robes with burning eyes. The image is so powerful that it has become almost inseparable from the mythology. When people in Russia tell stories about Koschei today, they picture Vasnetsov's painting. Stravinsky's opera Koschei the Immortal premiered in 1902 and caused a sensation, not just for its music, but for its depiction of the title character as a figure of existential dread rather than simple villainy. This Koschei was tragic in the full sense of the word, destroyed by forces that he himself had set in motion through his own transgression. The production was considered so disturbing by some contemporary critics that they struggled to categorize it. It wasn't quite opera. It wasn't quite folk performance. It was something new, a modern artist grappling with a very old fear. In the 20th century, particularly in Soviet-era animated films and children's television, Koschei became somewhat domesticated. The truly disturbing implications of his nature were softened for young audiences. He became more of a standard fairy tale villain, bumbling and ultimately defeatable, stripped of his cosmic significance. This is what happens to powerful mythological figures in mass media. They get simplified for distribution. But then, particularly in the last few decades, there's been a significant revival of interest in Koschei's deeper mythological significance, both in Russia and internationally. Fantasy literature in Russian has engaged seriously with the figure. The game industry has produced remarkable portrayals. And perhaps most significantly, as global audiences have become more interested in non-Western mythology, Koschei has started to appear in contexts far removed from his original cultural home. You can find Koschei in video games set in fantasy versions of medieval Russia. You can find him in dark fantasy novels in English. You can find him referenced in discussions of Dungeons and Dragons liches, because the lich, the most powerful undead wizard in that game's mythology, with its soul hidden in a phylactery outside its body, is almost certainly a direct descendant of Koschei. The concept was probably absorbed into Western fantasy through the work of various fantasy writers who were familiar with Slavic mythology. Think about that. An ancient fear from the forests of Eastern Europe crystallized into story form thousands of years ago, traveled through folk tradition, into literature, into the bones of modern fantasy gaming, and became, without most people ever knowing where it came from, one of the most iconic monster concepts in contemporary imaginative culture. Koschei's idea, the external soul, the death hidden outside the body, turned out to be so compelling that it replicated itself across cultures and media for millennia. Which brings me to what I think is the most important thing to say about Koschei as we reach the end of this journey through his mythology. He is not just a character in stories. He is a question. He is the question that every culture, in every era, in every corner of the world has eventually had to face. What is the relationship between mortality and meaning? Is a life that never ends still a life, in any sense that matters? What exactly are we preserving when we try to extend human life? And what might we be losing in the process? The folk tradition, in its deep wisdom and its unsentimentality, answered this question a very long time ago, with a figure so vivid and so specific that generations of children fell asleep with nightmares of a gaunt immortal in a castle at the edge of the world. The answer is not that immortality is impossible. The Slavic storytellers were too honest for that. They said it might be possible. Koschei achieved it. The answer is that immortality is not what you think it is. That to gain it, you must give up the very thing, the soul, the connection to the living world, the capacity for genuine feeling and genuine relationship that makes immortality worth wanting. And without that thing, what you have is not a long and full life. It is an empty one, infinite in duration, hollow at the center. He is the bone-thin figure who removed the warmth from himself to make himself invulnerable and has been cold ever since, who took something out of the deepest part of himself and hid it somewhere unreachable, and has been searching for it in every castle, in every captive, in every person he has ever tried to hold, for as long as anyone can remember. He is Koschei the Deathless, and he has been warning us about something for a very long time. We just forgot to listen. And maybe that's the most unsettling thing about him. Not the needle in the egg and the duck in the hare and the chest under the oak on the island, not the castle at the edge of the world, not the immortality, not the power, not the predatory hunger for warmth he can no longer feel. The most unsettling thing is this. Koschei didn't become what he is through weakness. He didn't stumble into it. He didn't have it forced on him. He looked at the world with full intelligence and full understanding, and he chose it. He made the trade with open eyes, and he would make it again, because even now, centuries into his cold immortality,